Awesome. All right. So welcome everyone. Where we're going to kick it off is on page 104 and the chapter Two Wives. And the joke I always make is please don't leave. Hold on. Don't go. Just say, wait, hold on. Don't leave. Because as we dive into Two Wives, this is a beautiful opportunity to experience this chapter in a whole new way. And I like to joke around that Two Wives is my favorite chapter. And I mean that in some ways. And what I mean by that is we get to have this really cool experience. And it's what I like to call the we agnostics experience. And the we agnostics experience, you guys let me know if this is your experience. But when you first read We Agnostics, you're like, what the heck is a prosaic steel girder? What does electricity have to do with my alcoholism? This is stupid and I hate it. Anyone? No show of hands. Okay, just me. That was just thank you. That was just my experience. Fair enough. But then I went through the book with somebody who was armed with facts about themselves, who explained to me the metaphors that were being made and explained to me what was happening in that chapter. And anyone here? What is your favorite chapter? We Agnostics? If it is, yeah, you know. It goes from our like, I hate this chapter, I can't stand it, to it's my favorite chapter. And part of why I love Two Wives is we get to have a very similar experience. I won't promise that I will make it your favorite chapter. That might be a little outlandish. And I might be promising something I can't deliver on, but I do promise that we're going to have a new experience. And if we came to this chapter and we thought it didn't apply to me, or we thought it's outdated, or man, why do they even have this in the book? I promise we will have a new experience and we're going to see how this chapter is applicable for us today in 2024. And so first and foremost, I want to address some misconceptions and preconceived notions and some, I guess, old wives' tales. How about the chapter Two Wives? I don't know if that's quite, I don't know if there's wives' tales, but first and foremost, who wrote this chapter? This chapter was written by Bill Wilson. You'll often hear that Lois wrote the chapter. That's not true. Bill wrote the chapter, and Bill always had intention of writing this chapter. You might also hear that Anne Smith was approached and asked to see if she could write this chapter. And that's only a half truth. Anne Smith was approached and she was asked if she could contribute something to the big book, but what it was going to be a story in the story section, and Anne declined. So Bill Wilson always had intention of writing this chapter and wrote this chapter. Now, we can feel free to get our little, I don't know, I was gonna be like upset hats. I don't know why we needed hats to be upset, but if you want one, I'll get hats. Or we could do resentment inventory, that works too. But if we wanted to be like, man, what's Bill doing trying to explain what it's like from, like a woman's perspective or this or that? Why don't, for this moment, we just lay that aside and have a look at the idea of what was Bill Wilson's singleness of purpose. Bill Wilson wanted one thing more than anything else. And his entire life of sobriety was dedicated to one thing more than anything else, helping other alcoholics. So this is a chapter, yes, written by a middle-aged white dude, but whose sole purpose was how to help other alcoholics. And so that is the approach. So this might not be the best advice if I'm like, man, I want to leave the bum. But this is really good advice if, man, I want to help the bum, I didn't plan for that to be the thing that I was saying today. And so as we approach the chapter Two Wives, and actually as we approach these later chapters, and I want you to know I'm so truly so grateful you guys are here with me today, because I love studying the later chapters because they're not studied that often. And there's often vital information and prayers and promises and directions that we miss because we don't study. And I don't know about you guys, but when my home group, we get to the chapter Two Wives, we'll read out of it and then we'll share on what was read. We kind of get stuck on the title. And we're like, oh, I wasn't a wife, never been a wife. Or we're like, I had a wife and I divorced her because my alcohol, you know what I mean? We get stuck in the title. But what I want us to do is to be open about reframing this whole title. So if you're feeling a little bit rebellious, you're feeling about like breaking some rules and being a bit of a badass. I don't know if this is badass, but if you're feeling about some shenanigans, and like, listen, what you guys know is I shenan, and then I will shenan again. Feel free to cross out 2 wives, like cross out wives, and write to the untreated Al-Anon, or write to the unhealed codependent, or write to those as bound to the alcoholic as the alcoholic is bound to alcohol. Because that is an important distinction, an important differentiation. We're not talking about people who have the capacity to leave. We are people, we're talking, this chapter is 2 wives, but it's really for those who are as unable to leave the alcoholic as the alcoholic is able to leave alcohol. And so if we just reframe this chapter in that way, this whole thing's going to open up in a brand new way. So let's dive on into it, shall we? I know some of you guys are like, what? Shenanigans already. I know, controversial. Stick around. We'll write some inventory on me, or you can send me some carrier pigeons. I think I just like the idea of birds coming to see me. It's very well adjusted. All right. So it says, with few exceptions, our book thus far has spoken of men, because in 1939, there was one sober woman. You know, there were not a lot of sober women. And any time in this book we see men and women, the and women was a hopeful and inclusive statement. And it says, but what we have said applies quite as much to women. Evidence, it's happened. Here I am. And here are we, some of us. Yeah, awesome. And it says, our activities in behalf of women who drink are on the increase. There is every evidence that women regain their health as readily as men if they try our suggestions. Ladies, here we are. Yeah, heck yeah. And it says, but for every man who drinks, others are involved. And so this is a chapter addressed to those who are involved with my alcoholism, who have been affected by my alcoholism, who have been hurt by my addiction. The wife who trembles in fear of the next debauch. You know, that spouse that maybe we put through relapse after relapse after relapse, and they're so afraid of the next inevitable relapse that will destroy their home. The mother and father who see their son wasting away. Did we have parents who saw the pain and suffering that we were putting ourselves through, and the worry that we caused them with our alcoholism? And it says, among us, our wives, relatives, and friends whose problem has been solved. And I want to point out solved, because what we're talking about is recovered, not cured, recovered. The problem has been solved. And again, a continuation of the promise that started on the very first page of this book. Not the blank page, but the, one right after that. So, as well as some who have not yet found a happy solution. We want the wives of Alcoholics Anonymous to address the wives of men who drink too much. What they say will apply to nearly everyone bound by ties of blood or affection to an alcoholic. And I love that word bound, because that's really who this chapter is for. Those who are bound to the alcoholic and are unable to leave. Now, I'm just gonna throw it out there. I'm sure there might be maybe 1 or 2 of us in the room tonight who maybe have a history of codependent relationships. I know it's quite a stretch. We got that one, we got the hands, you know what I mean? So there's a couple of ways we can approach the chapter 2 wives. The first way is kind of the obvious way of looking at the people that we have hurt with our illness, the people that we've hurt with our alcoholism, the people that we've hurt with our addiction, the people that we've hurt with our compulsive behavior, and the effect that we have had upon them. The other way is we can approach it, how do we help those that we're too close with, that we're maybe not able to help? Do you know what I mean? You know, those family members, those loved ones where we can't just straight up 12-step them because we're too close and they're not able to hear it. And in the chapter 2 wives, we are given directions on how to help people regardless of their level of willingness, and how we can best be a demonstration of this program. And it says, as wives of Alcoholics Anonymous, we would like you to feel that we understand as perhaps few can. We want to analyze the mistakes that we have made. We want to leave you, and I love this, it's a sneaky little promise. We want to leave you with the feeling that no situation is too difficult and no unhappiness too great to be overcome. And of course, they're talking about those who have to deal with us, those, and I mean, who doesn't have friends and loved ones that have addiction or alcoholism? You know, those of us who are in the rooms at 12 Step, I mean, those are our favorite people. You know, we have those loved ones. I'm sure we all have that loved one that's chronic relapse or that just isn't getting it. But what it's saying is that there is no situation too difficult, no unhappiness too great to be overcome. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through a number of pages in a way that is similar to a format that we've already seen before. Let's very quickly pop over to page 31. Very quickly, we're not going to spend too much time here. But on page 31, it's the second full paragraph. It says, here are some of the methods we tried. Now, as we're reading through the early part of the book where we reach page 31, we asked ourselves, these were some of the methods we tried. And you know what, just for fun, let's go have a look at them. Did we try this? Drinking beer only. Did I ever try? You know? And what am I trying to control? I'm trying to control the allergy. Did we try limiting the number of drinks? Again, an attempt to control the allergy. Never drinking alone, never having it in the morning, drinking only at home, never having it in the house, drinking only, or never drinking during business hours, drinking only at parties, switching from scotch to brandy, or crack to alcohol, alcohol to crack, because I'm a lady. Pinkies up, it's refined. Drinking only natural wines because of the antioxidants, you know? It's a plant, it couldn't hurt me. It burns my life to the ground, you know what I mean? Agreeing to resign if ever drunk on the job, taking a trip, not taking a trip, swearing off forever with and without solemn oath. And now is when we begin to approach that idea of, you know, that trying to exert power over the mental obsession. Taking more physical exercise, going to the gym. I'll have to make the joke about how my abs couldn't lead to abstinence. Reading inspirational books, going to health farms and sanitariums, accepting voluntary commitment to asylums, rehabs, detoxes, treatment centers, sober living, psychiatric facilities, psych wards. We could increase the list ad infinitum. And that same idea of have I tried these things and have they not worked is exactly what we're going to pick up on page 104. And so we can read it through the lens of an alcoholic or an addict or a compulsive, whatever brings you to the study. Have I caused my loved ones to feel this way? Have I hurt my loved ones in this way? Have I caused them to act in this way and it not helped? But we can also look in our lives and those people that perhaps we maybe at times been codependent around or towards, or the people that we tried to fix, manage, save, and control. And have we tried these things and they not worked? And here's the thing, the chapter 2 wives is really for the people who have gone through these things, have tried all these things, and it has not worked and they've not had the ability to truly leave. And so that's the context of this chapter. So it says we have traveled a rocky road back on 104. And it's rude because whenever we read that, I think of ice cream, which, I mean, the path of, you know, a loved one with alcoholism or addiction is, yeah, I could use an ice cream. You know what I mean? We've traveled a rocky road, though there is no mistake about that. We can ask ourselves, have we had long rendezvous? Which, I mean, if you've ever been sitting in your own mess, you know, sitting in your defects, sitting in your, you know, resentments and self-pity and stuff, yeah, that's what a long rendezvous is. But if you're talking with your sponsor and your sponsor's like, hey, get out of yourself, it's like, no, I'm just having a long rendezvous with the bondage of self. It sounds better, but it's the same thing. All right. We've had long rendezvous with hurt pride, frustration. And I want to pause at that word frustration. Now, I know you wonderful, lovely people at this big book study would never, ever, ever try to minimize a resentment and never be like, no, Paige, I don't have to do columns on it. It's not a resentment. I'm just a little frustrated. And we're going to see in the later chapters how frustration is a repeated theme. And I'm just a little frustrated. That frustration is like, like a burr, those like plants those pokey little plants that stick to you and like poke you all freaking day. That's what frustration is. I'm just a little frustrated, but I'm going to focus on it all day, every day. But it's not a big deal. And oftentimes when I work with my sponsees, and I'm like, hey, that sounds like a resentment. Why don't we do the columns? I'll help you do them. And they're like, no. It's just a little frustrated. So I'm one impulsive action away from creating frustration columns that I can give to them. It will look eerily like the resentment columns, but it'll be completely different. It'll be the resentment columns. But you don't tell them. Shh, it's a secret. Don't worry, it tells us we can be a little manipulative in Two Wives, only a little. All right, we won't get to that part this week, though. Stay tuned. All right. So frustration, self-pity. That self-pity, that warm blanket of self-pity that turns into a noose. That feeling? Misunderstanding. And why would there be misunderstanding in relation to a loved one with this illness? Well, keep in mind, doesn't an alcoholic, I'm quoting a different part of the book, an alcoholic looks like a fool of the first magnitude. Don't we look like the most insane people on earth? I'm never going to drink again. I'm never going to use again. I've destroyed my life. I've destroyed your life. I've hurt you. A day, a week, or month later, we do it again. You know what I mean? We leave treatment in the middle of the night just because we needed one drink or we needed one hoot. You know what I'm saying? That's the stuff that we do. And it's so baffling and so hurtful. So that leads to that misunderstanding and fear. And we know fear is that evil and corroding thread that eats away the fabric of my existence. And it says, these are not pleasant companions. And so for somebody whose life depends on having freedom from those things, do you know what I mean? I can't live in resentment. I can't live with frustration. They're totally different. I can't live in fear. I can't live in self-pity. I can't live in that place of hurt, pride, and misunderstanding. I cannot live there. Our lives depend on continuing to clear them up. But as we continue to approach this chapter, Two Wives, what I want us to see is that idea if we are reading the book, we are the ones who have the tools. And if we have the tools, it is our responsibility to use them. So we don't get to use Two Wives as like ammunition to be like, here's what you got to do. You got to work on your hurt, pride, and misunderstanding me. No. We get to work on our hurt, pride, and our misunderstanding of them, even though the context is Two Wives. I'm sorry to ruin everyone's like, I'm gonna leave now. I can't arm this chapter to get people to get off my back. I know. Alrighty. It says these are not pleasant companions, because these are the things that weigh us down and travel with us every single day. We have been driven to maudlin sympathy. That's that self-pityingly, that pity-seeking behavior, that. To bitter resentment. Have I gone from extreme to extreme? It says some of us veered from extreme to extreme, ever hoping that one day our loved ones would be themselves once more. In the context of this is asking, have we done these things to try to get somebody to change? And has that not worked? And if you're like, no, if they don't change right away, I leave. Wonderful. This doesn't apply. But it does in the sense of, has our behavior caused people to experience all these things? And this is the hurt that we cause them. Darn it, it applies. One way or another, it's applicable. All right. Our loyalty and the desire that our husbands hold up their heads and be like other men have begotten all sorts of predicaments. Our desire, and keep in mind, the desire is good. In how it works, we talk about how even with the best motives, we hurt other people. So even with the best moments, have we caused harm with our wonderful intentions? It says we have been unselfish and self-sacrificing. We have told innumerable is too many to count. We've told too many lies to count, innumerable lies, to protect our pride and our husband's reputation. We have prayed, we have begged, we have been patient, we have struck out viciously. We have run away. We have been hysterical. We have been terror-stricken. We have sought sympathy. we have had retaliatory love affairs with other men? Have I experienced any of these things to try to get somebody to change? Or have people acted in this way around me to try to get me to change? Because that is how harmful my behavior was. Our homes have been battlegrounds many an evening. In the morning, we have kissed and made up. Our friends have counseled chucking the men, the alcoholics, and we have done so with finality, only to be back in a little while, hoping, always hoping. And one of the things that I really want to, I'm going to bring it up if I can do it quickly, because I didn't prepare as well as I thought I was going to. I'm going to bring up, there we are. I'm going to bring up the cycle. I want to point something out, and I'm not going to like go, ooh, oh yeah, I'm going to be in it. Ooh, and let me tell you, I was in it for a long time. But you can see in that little sentence that I read, the cycle. You saw that our friends have counseled checking the men, and we have done so with finality. That's swearing off. I am never going to put up with this drunk again. I'm setting my boundaries. I'm done with them. I'm breaking up. I'm not answering the phone. I am done. And then what happens? It says only to be back in a little while, hoping, always hoping. What is the coming back in a little while? Hoping, always hoping. That's the mental obsession that for us leads to the first drink or the first drug. But for the untreated Al-Anon, this time will be different. This time, you know, my alcoholic, my addict, my loved one is going to be different. And we see that it is a cycle and it goes around and around and around. And that's why I approach this chapter to those who are as bound to the alcoholic is to alcohol. They don't have the capacity to leave. They have tried. And now in the next sentences are men. So that's us with alcoholism or addiction or compulsive behavior. It says, our men have sworn great solemn oaths that they were through drinking forever, that firm resolution, never again, I am never going to drink again. And we mean it, but that has no effect. It says we believe them when no one else could or would. Then in a few days, weeks, or months, a fresh outburst. And so what happens for me as an untreated alcoholic or an untreated addict, I come to the morning after and I say, I am never going to drink again or use again. And I've got nothing that I can put between me and that first drink. A day, a week, or month later, I get that mental obsession, that insane thought that tells me this time will be different. I take that drink and off I go. And I burn it to the ground only to say, that's it, I'm never going to do it again. So that same cycle that I experience as an alcoholic, as an addict, is the same cycle that the untreated Al-Anon experiences. And we're going to allude to something because I shared the cycle. I'm not alluding to it for the alcoholics, for the addicts. The only way that we have to get off the cycle that we have found that works reliably is a spiritual awakening. That is our solution in 12 step. And the way that we have to reliably produce that entire psychic change, that spiritual awakening, is the 12 steps. And the 12 steps is how we get off this cycle to experience the freedom that's on offer. And I mean that for anyone that's new or struggling or coming back. Or if you're coming to the study because you have a loved one that is suffering from this illness, it's going to be a similar course of action. Just spoilers. That we gotta, regardless of who I am, if I'm reading this book for whatever reason, gotta work these steps. I gotta take these actions. And that will allow me to live a life that is full of joy and contentment, regardless of my external circumstances. So, and if anyone if anyone who hasn't seen the cycle before wants it, I can put it in the WhatsApp group. Rob put it in the chat because he's on top of things. Yeah. And if you guys want, I do have some stickers. So I turned them into stickers. So if you want a sticker, I'll mail it to you. But you gotta send me your address. So that's what they're there for. And it's a great way to approach newcomers. It's like, here, have a sticker. Hey, how you doing? Are you new here? You know, conversation starters. Heck yeah. Alrighty. So it says, we seldom had friends in our homes, never knowing how or when the men of the house would appear. We could make few social engagements. We came to live almost alone. And this is a theme that we're going to pick up in the later chapters about how my illness begins to really isolate the family, and isolate my loved ones. And we're going to see that isolation as a real theme, as a consequence of my alcoholism, as a consequence of my addiction. And some of you guys, let's see if we relate to this next line. When we were invited out, our husbands sneaked so many drinks that they spoiled the occasion. Oh, anyone ever sneak drinks at an occasion? Also, if we could drink responsibly, why did we have to sneak them? Definitely a sign of the allergy. And I love that idea. If, on the other hand, they took nothing, their self-pity made them killjoys. Yep. I'm gonna ruin everyone's day because I can't get drunk and high, you know? Yeah, because I can't see beyond my own nose and my own pain. Absolutely. It says there was never financial security. Positions were always in jeopardy or gone. Sound familiar? It says an armored car could not have brought the pay envelopes home. The checking account melted like the snow in June. Now, I know I live in Canada, but that's what that means is the money does go quickly. It wouldn't be completely unheard of to have snow in June, but I'm hoping we're done, you guys. It's been a long winter, but that's not the point of the sentence, not my weather woes. And it says, sometimes there were other women. How heartbreaking was this discovery? How cruel to be told they understood our men as we did not. And we could look at our own infidelity, but we could also look at, when I work with sponsees, some of the most difficult things is when their partner or spouse or, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, cheats on them. And it's not just because of the betrayal of trust, but it is also because that forces them to have to make a decision. You know what I mean? Whether I go or whether I stay. And that can be so, so hard. Again, the context of this chapter is for people who are not able to stay. But again, a reminder for people like us, did my drinking, did my drug use cause me to cross sexual boundaries that I would not cross otherwise? Absolutely. Did it cause me to hurt people that I would not hurt otherwise? Absolutely. So it says the bill collectors, the sheriffs, the angry taxi drivers, the policemen, the bums, the pals, even the ladies, they sometimes brought home. Now we can ask, listen, if you brought home other ladies, that's a little bit much. And I kind of look at it in the wife hat. I'm like, if you bring home another woman, I don't think I'm inhospitable or nag or joy killer. I think my upset is a reasonable reaction. I'm just going to throw that out there. But did I not have, a collection of bill collectors calling? Did I have the police or other emergency services showing up? Were there not many an angry taxi cab driver, or were we not able to use Uber because we got too low of a rating? You know what I mean? Because of our shenanigans, right? Did we, go through that and put other people through that? Our husbands thought we were so inhospitable. Joy killer, nag, wet blanket, they said. The next day they would be themselves again, and we would forgive and try to forget. Again, that swearing off. Okay, this time will be different. I'm going to give them one more chance. I'm going to try it again. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, we go through that. Okay, I'm not going to put up with him, this alcoholic, this drug addict, and the next morning they're themselves, and maybe I can make it work. These are people that cannot leave. And again, it says we've tried, and this is the harm that we cause. It says we have tried to hold the love of our children for their father. They have told small tots that father was sick, which was much nearer the truth than we realized. They struck the children, kicked out door panels, smashed treasured crockery, ripped the keys out of pianos. And that is abusive behavior. And I can tell you who I was in my active addiction and my active alcoholism was at times incredibly abusive. And that is not who I am or how I would behave today, but that is the power of this illness. And I remember my sponsor saying something at a meeting. We were going through 2 wives, and it struck him, just the power of alcoholism, just the power of this illness. That's not who we are, but that is who this illness turns us into, to do these things. Again, unless you got a diagnosis, we're not sociopaths, we're not psychopaths, we're just regular people. And I don't know about you, I did not want to be the person that I was becoming. I desperately did not want to hurt the people that I was hurting. I did not want to break their hearts. I did not want to do it again. And I did it again. That's the power of alcoholism. So if we're reading this through the lens of those of us who have alcoholism, those of us who are addicts, man, that is the power of this thing. I don't want to hurt my loved ones, and yet I continue to hurt my loved ones. That's why we need the solution. And that's why we've got to work this thing with the tenacity and the like just rigor that it requires, you know? And it says, in the midst of such pandemonium, they may have rushed out, threatening to live with the other women forever. In desperation, we even got tight ourselves, the drunk to end all drunks. The unexpected result was that our husbands seemed to like it. Now, I want you to know I first came into the rooms of 12 Step, not because I had a problem, because obviously I don't. It was my ex. He had the problem. I'm going to give you a little bit of insight into that relationship. It's going to be quite telling. He was 16 years older than me. Shock and awe. Untreated daddy issues. And he had been drinking alcohol and smoking crack for the entire 16-year age difference. And in the morning, we had to go to the liquor store at 10 a.m., 11 a.m. on Sundays, because if we didn't, he would have a seizure. So I compared what I thought was just a little bit of unmanageable drinking with what I saw with him. And I'm like, no, he's the alcoholic. There's not a problem with me. I don't have seizures. Literally, I thought seizures was what made you an alcoholic. It's lack of control, lack of choice, but I had not been informed. And so there was a couple times we went to some meetings, and I remember reading this chapter, and this should have been a red flag for me. Because I remember really like, yeah, in desperation, I did get tight myself. Yeah, it was a good drunk I went on. There was no alarm bells that were loud enough to get my attention at that point. But like, ding, 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 I got some problems of my own, and here we are. All right. So it says, perhaps at this point we got a divorce and took the children home to father and mother. Then we were severely criticized by our husband's parents for desertion. Usually, we did not leave. We stayed on and on. We finally sought employment ourselves as destitution faced us and our families. And what we're going to see, or what we've already seen, is a progression. We saw that on page 31. On page 31, we're just going to try to limit the number of drinks. We're going to try drinking beer only. We're going to switch our brands. But then we end up going to like, man, I'm going to lock myself in an institution. There's a progression. And we see this progression here in Two Wives. And that is the inevitable nature of alcoholism. The more that I go through this cycle, the more those consequences are going to pile up. And it goes on to say, we began to ask medical advice as the sprees got closer together. And I don't know about you, but that's something I've experienced and that I've seen. So when we go back to the cycle and we look at those, well, heck, I'll just put the cycle back on the little Zoom screen. Ta-da! I just love this little feature where I'm there. It's like it feels exciting. I know it's a little much. Unfortunately, the capacity to tone it down, I lost that somewhere, so I'm sorry. But when we talk about the sprees getting closer together, I don't know about you, but I've seen it in myself, and I've seen it in newcomers who come to the rooms and say, I'm never going to do it again. And maybe they're able to hang around the meetings and maybe do a little bit of work in the steps, but they're able to get 9 months. And then the mental obsession gets them and they take a drink. And they go around again, and that spree begins to go a little bit longer. Then they get 6 months and they're off again. And then 6 months and they're off again. Then 3 months they're off again. And then 3 months and then 2 months and then 1 month, and to the point where they can't get a week sober. Have we seen that, or have we experienced that? That's when we talk about it being progressive. That's really what we're pointing to. And we see that alarming mental and the alarming physical and mental symptoms, the deepening pall of remorse, depression, and inferiority that settled down on our loved ones. that emerging remorseful, filled with guilt and shame and remorse, and it is not enough. And it says, these things terrified and distracted us. As animals on a treadmill, we have patiently and wearily climbed, falling back in exhaustion after each futile effort to reach solid ground. And I love that it talks about it being a treadmill, because that's what it is. The cycle, it's going around and around and around and around. And just like I'm trying everything and anything that I can think to put between me and the first drink or the first drug, and nothing works, and I keep going again and again, and I'm experiencing that hopelessness, that's the same for the family members. Our loved ones that are trying everything that they can think of to get me to not take the first drink or the first drug, or to be able to leave and experience some peace of mind, and it not work. It is a cycle. And we don't got a way out of that cycle until we experience that psychic change. And isn't that, I just love where it talks about that futile effort to reach solid ground. That's all I wanted was solid ground. And I couldn't find solid ground until I got rooted in something deeper. And that rooted in something deeper was God. And it wasn't an idea of God, it was an experience of God that happened as the result of the 12 steps. It says most of us have entered the final stage with commitments to health resorts, sanitariums, hospitals, and jails. Again, when we see sanitariums, we think rehabs, detoxes, treatment centers. Health resorts could be, if you go to a real fancy rehab, there was that one that would be on commercials all the time, Passages Malibu, if you could afford that one, one with a pool. But that idea of like going to seek help from rehabs, treatment centers, psych wards, emergency rooms, those hospitals and jails where we having legal problems. It says sometimes there was screaming delirium and insanity. Death was often near. Was that my experience? And so that's what it's saying, man. If we're reading this and we know what it's like to be on either side of it, we are in a hopeless condition. And if we're reading this and we're like, no, I would never put up with that. I mean, wonderful, great. What's that like? That sounds really healthy. Can't relate, but if we can relate, that's who this chapter is for. That's who we're talking about. And it says, under these conditions, we naturally made mistakes. Some of them rose out of ignorance of alcoholism. Now, keep in mind, we can have ignorance of alcoholism in the rooms of 12 steps. How often do we hear things like, just pick up the phone before you pick up a drink? Call us before you call your dealer. Man, I don't have the power to do that, right? Things like that sound logical, sound reasonable, but in actual practice, we don't have that power. And so, of course, those who don't have this illness, how could we be mad that they not understand? And it says sometimes we sense dimly. So dim, imagine the light. It's actually, I got a dim light because the bright lights, I have a bit of a headache. So dim, we had a little bit of a vague sense dimly that we were dealing with sick men. And we point to sick, we're talking about ill, unwell, operating from pain, not morally bad or irrepressibly broken. That's not what we're talking about. Had we fully understood the nature of the alcoholic illness, we might have behaved differently. And that's also why it's important that I understand the nature of the alcoholic illness. When I'm sponsoring others, that I properly be armed with facts about myself so that I'm able to offer them this way of life. And I understand, do you know what I mean? I gotta be armed. I gotta know. And it says, how could such men who love their wives and children be so unthinking, so callous, so cruel? There could be no such love in such persons, we thought, and just as we are being convinced of their heartlessness, they would surprise us with fresh resolves and new attentions. And man, isn't that heartbreaking that we give that hope and then we take it away, For a while, they would be their old sweet selves, only to dash the new structure of affection to pieces once more. I just want to pop us over to page 21, because one of the things that happens is when we read Two Wives, we think it's this brand new chapter with this outdated information, but a lot of what we're going to say is a continuation of what's been said throughout the book. So I always like to bounce this around a little. So 2 wives, it's going to be a rocky road. Bring your ice cream. I don't know why I'm like this. And so what we're going to do is we're going to get into the chapter the paragraph, what about the real alcoholic? And that long one that goes, yeah, exactly. It's right there where it says he uses his gifts to build up a bright outlook for himself and his family, and then pulls the structure down on his head by a senseless series of sprees. And even right before that, it talks about how we have possessed special abilities, skills, and aptitudes, right? Promising career. And that's exactly what it's talking about there. It's we build up these structures of life and we tear it to pieces. And actually, it speaks about that in the chapter Into Action in step 9, in making amends to the family, about how we build it up and we've torn it down. We've spent years tearing down those structures, and it might take a long time to repair. So back on page 107. I know, and we're going to bounce around again, so just like prepare for the bounce. So it says, asked why they commenced to drink again, they would reply with some silly excuse or none. It was so baffling and so heartbreaking. So now let's pop over, and let's pop over to page 23. And I'm just gonna like right where we're talking about these observations would be academic and pointless. That first paragraph, and we're gonna read the 2 paragraphs. And so it's the observations that, hey, I have a physical allergy. And once I start to drink or use, I can't control the amount that I take. It's saying that observation would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than his body. My main problem is that I have the mental obsession. My main problem is that I have a mind that takes me back to that first drink that compels me to continue, or the first drug that compels me to continue. That my main problem is my mental obsession. And here it is. If you ask him why he started on that last bender, the chances are he will offer you any one of 100 alibis. But sometimes these excuses have a certain plausibility, but none of them really make sense in the light of the havoc an alcoholic drinking bout creates. They sound like the philosophy of the man who, having a headache, beats himself on the head with a hammer so he can't feel the ache. Sound familiar? The thing that I'm using to treat my pain is making my pain worse. If you draw this fallacious, that means false, attention to the alcoholic, he will laugh it off or become irritated and refuse to talk. Once in a while, he may tell the truth. And the truth is, strange to say, he usually has no more idea why he took that first drink than you have. And actually goes on to say, some drinkers have excuses with which they are satisfied part of the time, but in their hearts, they really do not know why they do it. And so we would reply so back on 107, we would reply with some silly excuse or none, not knowing why we did it, not like realizing just why do I keep taking that first drink? I need to stay sober. I have to stay sober. I want to stay sober. And yet I do it again and again. So back on 107, middle of the paragraph that I bounced us around on, which I know is difficult to find. Thank you for your patience with me. Thank you for flying, bouncing around airlines, a little all over the place. Rocky landings. Yeah. Make sure you put your tray table up. Ooh. The baggage might move, so you just be careful when you're getting stuff from the overhead containers. But don't you worry, the weather's nice. It'll melt, like the snow will melt like it's June. I don't know. Random tie-in. Alrighty. So it says, it was so baffling, so heartbreaking. Could we have been so mistaken in the men that we married? When drinking, they were strangers. Sometimes they were so inaccessible that it seemed as though a great wall had been built around them. I apologize for this. Let's pop over to page 18. I know. So what it's talking about is how we have those walls and we keep our family and loved ones out. Page 18. And it says, what we're doing is that third full paragraph when it says highly competent psychiatrists on page 18 who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss his situation without reserve. And so what it's saying is like, hey, when doctors, treatment centers, psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, therapists want to talk to us about our drinking, our drug use, our compulsive behavior, we tend to not be super honest and forthright. But it says, strangely enough, wives, parents, and intimate friends usually find us even more unapproachable than do the psychiatrist and the doctor. Those we are closest to are those that we have the biggest walls around. We keep them at the furthest length, especially when it comes to our alcoholism. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to hear what they have to say. Our walls are up. And so back to 107. And the reason I want to point that out again is this is not old information. This is a continuation of what we've been talking about through this book up until this point. So 107 bottom paragraph. I know, I appreciate you guys that are bouncing around. I know it's a lot. Thank you. And we'll be doing it more. Oh. And even if they did not love their families, how could they be so blind about themselves? What had become of their judgment, their common sense, their willpower? Why could they not see that drink meant ruin to them? Why was it when these dangers were pointed out, they agreed and got drunk again immediately? And what we are talking about is the mental obsession. My judgment does nothing to prevent me from taking the first drink of the first drug. My common sense does nothing to prevent me from taking the first drink of the first drug. My willpower does nothing to stop me from taking that first drink. The dangers and the pain and the suffering, none of it is sufficient to keep me from taking the first drink. That is the power of the mental obsession, and that's what we are talking about. These are some of the questions which race through the mind of every woman who is an alcoholic husband. We hope that our book has answered some of them. Perhaps your husband has been living in that strange and distorted world of alcoholism, or that strange world of alcoholism where everything is distorted and exaggerated. Isn't that true? You know what I mean? Isn't that true? That world of alcoholism where everything is distorted and exaggerated. And of course, on the face of it, we're talking about the distortion and the exaggeration of when I am fully in that cycle, you know? But there's I don't know, maybe y'all are more spiritually well than me, but I get a little off the beam and things get a little distorted and exaggerated. You know what I mean? You wake up a little off and it's like, everyone hates me. You know, just, again, I'm sure you guys wake up in betterment. This is why I gotta be doing the work right away upon awakening, because it can get a little squirrely if I'm not doing this thing on a daily basis. But yeah, I can get in that exaggerated and distorted. And I don't know about you guys, but for me, that is a beautiful description of the lens of self-centeredness. When I'm seeing the world through that lens of self. What about me? What about me? You know what I mean? Actually, whenever I think, what about me? I'm like, ooh, I'm in trouble. That's like a little hallmark. Uh-oh, Paige, you're in self, you know? I don't got to worry about me. God's got me. So it says, you can see that he really does love you with his better self. And of course, there is such a thing as incompatibility. But in nearly every instance, the alcoholic only seems to be unloving and inconsiderate. It is usually because he is warped and sickened that he says and does these appalling things. Is that my experience, that when I am in the cycle of my alcoholism or in the cycle of my addiction, I behave in ways that I am appalled by, that I am deeply sickened by, ways that I would never want to act upon sober. And this is a promise. Today, most of our men, well, I mean, it says most, it doesn't say all, it says most. But you know what I mean? We're not gonna speak in absolutes. Today, most of our men are better husbands and fathers than ever before. And so this next paragraph is a direction. Now bear with me with this direction. We're gonna read it, and then we're gonna have a look at where it gives us this exact same direction before. It says, try not to condemn your alcoholic husband no matter what he says or does. I want to be clear, condemn is different from setting boundaries, communicating your feelings, expressing yourself. Condemn is that judgment. Condemn is that that punitive, that punishment. You know what I mean? That's what it means to condemn, to sentence them. That's what we're talking about. He is just another very sick and unreasonable person. Treat him when you can as though he had pneumonia. When he angers you, remember that he is very ill. Now, I want to point something out. We might be reading this. Some of you guys know where we're going. Yeah, some of you guys know we're rocking and rolling. I want to point out it might be easy to weaponize this and be like, I'm ill. I need you to wrap me in wool and put me on a pedestal. That's a family afterward joke. We'll get there. No, you got to be nice to me. No, absolutely not. This is for us. We're reading it. So when we're dealing with people who are sick, try to remember and treat them as though they had pneumonia. Now let's pop over to page 60. 67. But I also want to point out some stuff on page 66. So we're going to do 66 and then 67. So on page 66, first full paragraph, it says, it is plain that a life, not an alcoholic's life, not a drug addict's life, a life, any life, which includes deep resentment, leads only to futility and unhappiness. That's the first full paragraph on 66 for those that are trying to find it. Just want to make sure. All right. And it says, to the precise extent that we permit these, that we hold on to resentment, do we squander? That means to waste the hours that might have been worthwhile. And that means any human being who holds on to deep resentment, who holds on to condemnation, who lives in that place of misery is suffering themselves. Now, for us, it says, but with the alcoholic whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, the business of resentment is infinitely grave. If you don't know what infinitely grave means, that means infinitely fatal. If you don't believe me on that, Rob will put you don't have to put the definition in the chat because the very next line says, we found that it is fatal, For when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the spirit. And the insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again. And for us, to drink is to die. Now let's go back, or let's go to the very, very bottom of page 66. So this is the direction. This is not a brand new direction. Bottom of page 66. This was our course. We realized that people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. So we're seeing the same idea of treating the people that we are struggling with as though they are sick. And the sick man's, what's often referred to as the sick man's prayer or the resentment prayer on page 67, we ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God save me from being angry. Thy will be done. And so that is not a brand new direction. That is a direction that we've seen already. So it's not, oh, you wives better be nice to your husbands. No, it's that we gotta practice these actions. Absolutely. So back on page 108, and it says, there is an important exception to the foregoing. We realize that some men are thoroughly bad intentioned and no amount of patience will make any difference. An alcoholic of this temperament may be quick to use this chapter as a club over your head. Here's a direction. Don't let him get away with it. Do not put up with that. Absolutely not. No. If you are positive he is one of this type, you may feel you would better leave. Is it right to let him ruin your life and the lives of your children? So again, sometimes we read Two Wives and it's like, oh, you just got to put up with this. No, it's saying like, if this is not somebody who wants to get well, who is interested in getting well, who is just going to use this as an excuse to commit more abuse and more harms, absolutely not. Leave. That is the message that is in this chapter. And this is important, especially when he has before him a way to stop his drinking and abuse if he really wants to pay the price. Now we're going to leave it there, but before we leave it there, let's bounce around one last time. I know, all over the place. Let's pop over to page 14. And the reason I want to pop over to page 14 is we're going to go to the very first paragraph on page 14, where it says simple but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the capital F, capital L, Father of light who presides over us all. If we're new here today or we're struggling here today, we have a way out, but we got to pay the price. But here's the thing. It feels expensive. It feels, destruction of self-centeredness, that feels expensive when I haven't paid it. You know, when I'm looking at the front end of a 4-step and I'm like, oh boy, that's a lot. But I want you to know the price that we pay is really the gift that we receive all along. And I promise it's worth it. So we'll leave it there, and then we'll talk about the 4 different types of drinkers next week. So thank you guys for coming and doing 2 wives with me. It's really a pleasure.